Children are learning to concentrate in these activities. The skills of balancing, climbing, jumping are not merely physical ones. They are a function of the child's whole being. He is learning important facts about himself in his environment, and this is a very personal matter. Here you see children attaining self-undertaken goals and gaining the confidence which comes from this. Not very serious fighting. Maybe it was sparked off by last night's television, or the sight of a brick shaped like a gun. Some very well observed movements. The enjoyment of the activity is not irrelevant to the learning process. It's interesting to see how many times a child has to repeat an activity before he feels satisfied that he knows what will happen every time. This could be called testing hypotheses, or more simply, learning what to expect. These children are not learning the skills of sewing on a sampler and then applying them to some task. They have a goal in mind and are finding out how to attain it, and being helped then to develop the skills. They are incidentally learning many other things, such as the tensile strength of cotton. Learning what constitutes security. It's interesting to see how closely this little girl has observed every movement of her mother's actions in ironing. She plainly feels no sense of incongruity in doing this with a smart hat on. She's gaining experience in many areas of thought and feeling in this simple task, in which she may be expressing something of her understanding of her mother's role, as well as of the skill involved in ironing. Children's patience in self-undertaken tasks is always a matter of wonder compared with their impatience and carelessness in many domestic ways. They clearly have a picture in their own minds of what they're trying to achieve, even if it's somewhat obscure to an observer. Notice the delicacy of the children's finger movements. How did he come to be making a dodecahedron? It might well be that this was stimulated by some model brought in by a teacher, or that he'd seen one in a book, or that he'd been exploring various simpler shapes and was now progressing through the regular solids. On the face of it, it's difficult to see whether he is merely persisting in order to finish the task, or whether he is really absorbed. But his attention is certainly focused on the task, and whether he knows it or not, he's learning a good deal. Children's relationships with animals form an important halfway house in their developing understanding of reciprocity in relationships. The simple relationships they make with them give many opportunities for the expression of care, a kind of loving, to creatures whose demands on them are so much less than the demands of people. Can you hear anything? Here the children are learning to observe and compare and contrast, and finally to produce some creative expression of what they have learnt. They might be said to be learning a terrapin or learning a toad, which is so much more important than learning about a terrapin or a toad. This part of the film shows very clearly the importance of the senses in learning. How much touch and texture, listening and tasting is built into the learning, as well as the visual component. It's very important to have materials at hand with which to express and record what has been learnt. He will never look at a terrapin again in the same way after this experience. Experience and representation are both parts of learning. These children, too, are testing hypotheses. This is not codified, orderly knowledge, but forms the raw material of much later work in science, as well as making the children aware of many more complexities of perception and possibilities in the material they find around them. This activity could be called "What is happening to light?" And the children stimulate each other in this kind of activity so that they have a much richer experience than they could gain alone.